Funny thing is your brain takes what's out there and crosses with the entire brain, and then it interprets it.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Rabbi, I'm heading to a doctor appointment in about 15 minutes, so I'll stay with you guys until I see the doctor, okay?
It's actually, it's a doctor's appointment,
Okay.
10 minutes, but it stays till then.
We're ready to go.
Okay, so good morning. So greetings from the Ohel.
Oh.
I flew in overnight from Mexico. I know some people who know of my recent harrowing experience are a little bit surprised that I would go back to Mexico, but it is a big country. And honestly, I would not go back to the same state that I was, where I had my my little experience. But this was somewhere else. I got permission from my wife; she allowed me to go, and I flew straight back here to the Ohel, and I will be spending Shabbos here with my wife and with her sister and husband who came from Israel. For Shabbos at the Ohel, and Eretz Hashem, we have actually a wedding in the family next week in Chicago.
Is that the actual one?
So here I am. I'm here at the little meeting room here at the house by the Ohel. They're very gracious to give me a small, quiet place so I can conduct a shiur. And as I mentioned, I am coming from Mexico, and the reason I went to Mexico was for exactly what we're learning here in today's chitas, in today's portion of the Chumash. So yesterday began the first Masa, the first after the Bnei Yisrael were encamped at the bottom, the foot of Har Sinai, received the Torah, and they spent close to a year. Rashi calculates that it was a year less 11 days, and it was at that point that Hashem instructed Bnei Yisrael to close down the camp, wrap up the Mishkan with very special instructions of how it should be transported, and they are to now move on to Eretz Yisrael. So the very first place that they stopped after 3 days of travel, we have in today's Parsha the incident which is referred to as Tiferes Hataiva. The place is called Tiferes Hataiva, and the Bnei Yisrael were complaining about the mon. They were getting bored. For a whole year, they were basically eating the same thing, and they wanted meat, and they complained. And that is basically the story of this week's, today's portion of Chitas in the Parshas Behaaloscha that we are studying this week and that we will be reading in Shul on Shabbos.
I heard a story from a mashpia, Rabbi Man in Toronto.
Oh, yeah?
That there was one time in Yeshiva in Lubavitch in Russia, there was a big wealthy person, a Gvir, who donated barrels and barrels of chickpeas, arbis.
Oh.
And for 6 months, for breakfast they ate chickpeas, for lunch they ate chickpeas, and for supper they ate chickpeas. So the mashpia one time told them that skafia, controlling yourself, forcing yourself, is to eat is to not eat the chickpeas. Ishapcha is to force yourself to eat the whole plate.
You want to explain that in further detail, or?
It's just the idea that you're eating the same thing every single day.
Okay, yeah.
Going on and on.
Anyway, so they wanted to eat meat, and they came to Moshe Rabbeinu, and they were complaining about the lack of meat. Okay. Moshe Rabbeinu, we find in the Parsha, is very frustrated. He doesn't understand. And he turns to Hashem and he says, what am I supposed to do? And one of the things that Moshe Rabbeinu says, can we slaughter enough sheep and cattle that will suffice for the whole nation to eat, right? And Moshe Rabbeinu is very frustrated. It turns out that Hashem was actually upset with Moshe Rabbeinu because do you think that I'm not capable of providing them with enough meat? But the Alter Rebbe in the beginning of this week's Akutei Torah, the Alter Rebbe asked a question.
Please repeat. Actually, we temporarily had you muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So the Bnei Yisrael are complaining about meat. Moshe Rabbeinu is getting frustrated. He turns to Hashem and he says, what am I supposed to do with these people, right? And he says to Hashem, can we slaughter enough lamb and cattle that will suffice to feed the whole nation, right? Turns out Hashem was upset with Moshe Rabbeinu because where's your betachan? You think that this is something that I'm not able to provide, right? And Hashem indeed goes on to show Moshe Rabbeinu that he can provide. The Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah, the Alter Rebbe asks a very simple question. What is Moshe Rabbeinu? Why is he so concerned about slaughtering enough for a nation of 600,000 men? So let's say 1 million people, right? It's a lot. It's absolutely a lot. But, says the Alter Rebbe, there are 70 nations in the world, right? And of them, the population are many, many more than the 600,000 of Bnei Yisrael, right? And yet, they seem to have managed to found a way to eat meat, right? Without, right? So if you have to go to Mexico, you go to Mexico. But whatever, you do what you have to do, and you produce the meat, right? So the Alter Rebbe begins with this question about what's this deal? Why such a big deal? Why does Moshe Rabbeinu make it as if this seems to be an impossible task? So the answer, as it's developed in this minor of the Likutei Torah, has to do with the nature of Moshe Rabbeinu. Who was Moshe Rabbeinu? So the Alter Rebbe says that we find in this Zohar that in reference to Moshe and his brother Aharon, we find that Moshe Rabbeinu is referred to as the Shoshvino de Malko. He is the one who escorts the king, whereas his brother Aharon is called the Shoshvino de Matru Niso. He is the one who escorts the bride or the queen. Now, this, I guess we could say that it is a metaphor in the Zohar, but it's a reference to a bigger metaphor, and that is that at Har Sinai, this is considered metaphorically to be the chasana, the wedding between Hashem and his nation, Bnei Yisrael. Hashem is the chasan, the king. We are the kala, the bride, the queen. Now, traditionally, at a wedding, the chasan and the kala, when they walk up to the chuppah, to stand under the chuppah to be wed, so then the tradition is that there is an escort for the chasan and there's an escort for the kala. Says the Zohar, in reference to this metaphor of Hashem marrying the Bnei Yisrael. Har Sinai, incidentally, was the chuppah, okay, because the Medrash tells us that the whole mountain was uprooted and it was suspended mid-air, and we stood under Har Sinai like a chasan and kala stand under a chuppah. Who is the escort for the chasan? Hashem. Says the Zohar, that was Moshe Rabbeinu, Shoshvino de Malka. Who escorted Bnei Yisrael? That was Aharon, Shoshvino de Matronisa, in the words of the Zohar. So what does this mean? What does all of this mean? Okay. So Moshe Rabbeinu, being that he is, so to speak, the escort of the king, Moshe Rabbeinu represents the perspective as it is seen from Hashem, so to speak, from above. Okay? Moshe Rabbeinu is being the escort. So his function is to escort, so to speak, the ultimate and absolute truth as it exists above. The pure and adulterated truth of Hashem and His Torah. And Moshe Rabbeinu is the one who brings that truth to us, to Bnei Yisrael, here in this world. Okay. It's at times difficult for us to integrate that truth, to even comprehend it, because it is so absolute and so pure, right? It is difficult for us as finite mortal beings to be able to relate to something that is so absolute and so pure. I think somebody once told me that sometimes the best kind of gasoline is only good for souped up cars, right? So some very refined BMW or something. But if you put that into your regular good old Chevrolet, right? It actually it's not going to help, it actually might be worse. Okay. So we're like the Chevrolet. So such pure and potent, so to speak, energy of truth as it exists above sometimes is hard to digest for us people. And it's for that reason that the Bnei Yisrael needed an escort. Who's the escort? The escort is Aharon. Aharon was able to see things from our perspective. He understood our weakness, our limitations. So coming to meet the king, the chassan, under the chuppah, we need an escort. It's difficult to accept how things are coming directly from above, the way Moshe Rabbeinu would present. We need an escort. And we find, interestingly, about Aharon, that he was so in touch and, I guess, sensitive to our faults, to our weaknesses, right? That he would actually adapt to them. So, an example, the Mishnah Pirkei Avos tells us that we should learn from Aharon. What was Aharon? He loved peace, and he would constantly be pursuing peace. So interestingly, in the process of pursuing peace, we find that sometimes Aaron would have to say something somewhat less than the truth. For example, if there were two people, say a husband, a wife, or other two people who were having difficulty getting along with one another. So Aaron would approach one, let's say the husband, and he would say, your wife, she's really, really disturbed. It's hard for her maybe to express herself properly, and it comes out maybe not in the best way. And I know you're upset about it. I want you to know that truthfully, she's really, really, she feels terrible, etc., etc. This was not necessarily the truth, but this is what Aaron did in his pursuit of peace. And he would do the same thing also in reverse. He would go to the wife and he would say, your husband, he really regrets. He kind of painted himself into a corner. He doesn't know how to get out of this, right? But I am telling you that he really, really has deep remorse over the things that he perhaps said in the past, and so on and so forth. Again, not necessarily 100% true, but Aaron would present to each of the sides, and each thinking that the other one was completely remorseful. In the end, they end up making up. Why did they make up? Because the truth is that the relationship was a good relationship. But as human beings, we allow certain things to kind of like cloud things and get in the way and distract us and so on and so forth. By Aaron, presenting to each of the sides something that wasn't necessarily exactly the truth, he was able to actually uncover the deeper bonds of the two, and therefore he was called Aroy Dev Shalom. But he would pursue the peace, but it came at somewhat of a, he had to tell a few white lies in the process, okay? This was Aaron. Aaron, the escort of the Bnei Israel, he understood the Yidden very well, okay? Moshe Rabbeinu, being more the agent of Hashem, saw things in their absolute raw truth, right? And this made Moshe Rabbeinu be somewhat impatient. I hate to say intolerant, but somewhat impatient. That explains what happened in today's Parsha. Here comes Bnei Yisrael, and the Bnei Yisrael are complaining that they want meat. Moshe Rabbeinu just couldn't understand this. He couldn't understand. What's the big deal? You can live without meat, so to speak. I remember when I first started in the business of shechting meat. So somebody approached me about helping them. They wanted to provide, they wanted to make salami or whatever, cold cuts. Okay. And he needed me to be some of the liaison for the hechsher, for the rabbi to give the hechsher. So it turns out that the rabbi that I went to speak about it was from the old world, and he realized that this would be a lot of challenges involved. And he said, the community, this was not for the Pittsburgh community, this was for the New York community. He said, they can live without salami. They can live without salami. That's from his perspective. I mentioned this to someone else who was a little bit more involved with community, and he said, you know what, a wonderful Rav, great Talmud Chacham, but he's a little bit out of touch with the new generation, right? You can't just tell the new generation, you don't need meat, you don't need salami. You have to be Hashem, be happy with your roast beef. It doesn't also have to be hot dogs and corned beef and the alazach. Anyway, so this was like Moshe Rabbeinu. He didn't understand. So he said, not that it's not possible. Yes, there are people, the whole world, there's many more millions of people in the world, and Baruch Hashem, Hashem provides for everybody, and they even can eat meat, right? But for the Bnei Yisrael, he said, what are we going to do? We're going to start the whole meat production. This is what we have to get into, right? And Moshe Rabbeinu was not really too keen on this idea, and he turned to Hashem and he complained. So let me tell you a little bit about this whole thing called meat, and why we eat meat, and why I had to go to Mexico. So the Alter Rebbe here in the Tiferes explains it interestingly by elaborating on the nevuah of Yecheskel, the vision of Yecheskel that we read on the first day of Shabbos. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this nevuah of Yecheskel, this is probably the first detailed account of a vision of a reality that transcends the reality in which we live, or at least the reality that we connect to with our senses. Is everybody still there? Because it seems like I lost. Could somebody respond? Yeah. I don't know. It seems I don't know what happened to. Okay.
Reb Chaim went out, they had a phone call. He went out of Zoom.
Okay. Okay, very good, very good. Okay, good. Whatever. I lost sight of everybody. I'm looking at myself. Yeah. Okay, so in any case, this Nevuah of Yecheskel, very interesting. It's the only account, I would say, in Torah Shebiksav, where we have a detailed description of a spiritual reality. Okay. Well, it turns out that this Nevuah was written also very cryptically and very metaphorically. So when you read the actual Nevuah of Yecheskel, so you get these images, right, based on the imagery as Yecheskel presented it, right, and it can be a total distortion of what this is all about. This is one of the reasons why the Baal Shem Tov mentions how when it comes to the study of Kabbalah, one must be very careful, because this was the Nevuah of Yecheskel, but the truth is that many generations later, when Rav Shimon Bar Yochai began to reveal the inner secrets, so to speak, of the deeper dimensions of reality, the spiritual reality in the Zohar, he also presented it very metaphorically. The same style as Yecheskel in his Nevuah. Unfortunately, what happens is that when you study it in its original form, you could walk away with a complete and total distortion. So we find, for example, Torah's Chassidus, by the way, Chassidus is different, because Chassidus also deals with these deeper realities, but Chassidus is careful to use different language. The language of Chassidus is called the language of Hafshata, which is abstract. We use words where the words are more a reference to things, to the conception. They're conceptual, rather than being very descriptive in metaphorical terms. So, the Tzemach Tzedek, indeed, he says, when we speak about Ruchnius, and you cannot really ever totally avoid speaking about it in human language, right? Which there always is the chance that it will be somewhat distorted. So the Tzemach Tzedek writes is that we have to always be mindful, and constantly be reminding ourselves, lahapshit hadvarim megashmiyusa. You have to separate the concept from the terminology that's being used to convey the concept. So no matter what, you always have to bear that in mind. But yet Chassidus, goes out of its way to try to stick with the most abstract terminology as possible. Okay, I remember once Rabbi Yael Khan, my great teacher, who you've heard me quote many, many times. So he once said that there's a misconception in the world, and they say that Chassidus is an explanation of the Zohar. Chassidus, especially Chassidus Chabad. Chassidus Chabad is to understand logically and with intellectually the deeper realities of Ruchnius. Is an explanation of what it says in the Zohar. He says that's a mistake, because if anything, it's just the opposite. The Zohar actually would be more like the mashal of the things that we speak about in Chassidus, because the Chassidus we speak in pure, we try to speak in abstract terms, and the Zohar speaks again in very descriptive metaphorical terms. So it's actually that the Zohar is using mishalim, so to speak. They're using it's like a mashal, a parable, for the concepts that are behind that lie deeper within the mashal. Okay. What does it speak about in the Nebuah? The vision was basically, and to describe it, you could actually even draw a picture of it, of a chariot. On the chariot, it says there's the most form of a man, right? Below the chariot, we say that on by the four wheels, right? So we have different faces of different animals. We have a Pnei Shor, a Pnei Aryeh, a Pnei Nesher, an ox, a lion, and an eagle, and then also the face of a person, right? This is very beautiful. I mean, you can make a wonderful picture, right? But what does it all mean? What's the concept behind it? Okay. So number one, the Adam al Hakisei, let's start with it. Who is this Adam on the chair that's on top of the chair? This is basically what we refer to in Hasidus, also to some degree metaphorical, comes from the Zohar, the 10 Sephiros. What are the 10 Sephiros? The 10 Sephiros in the origins of the 10 Sephiros, which is from the world of Atzilus, is basically Hashem. But Hashem, how Hashem chose to present himself and actually be the means through which Hashem connects and interacts and communicates with the world that he created. Okay? In this world, he created a very special creature called a person. This person is actually the extension, so to speak, the messenger of Hashem in the world that he created. Now, being the messenger, we're here to bring Hashem's message. Therefore, the people that Hashem created to inhabit this world are created Adamo le'elyon. They are created in the very image, as it says in Bereshis, B'Tselem Elikim, also Elikim as Adam. Hashem created the Adam to be in his own image. So you get here an idea of what Yecheskel was talking about in this vision, in this nevuah. We start with the idea, let's start from the bottom. You have a person, okay? When you have a person, so you're able to identify certain elements of what is this creature called a person. So we find out that he has a consciousness, and his consciousness can be divided into two different areas, that which is called the Chachma, the Bina, the Das, right? And then we have his experiences, his emotions, and so on and so forth, and that's the rest of Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, and all. Okay. Well, it turns out that we're created in that imagery, right, that form, because it was meant to reflect the way Hashem decided to project himself. And indeed, when we speak about this projection of godliness, right, which is basically what the Sephiros are, the Sephiros, right, the different spheres of Atzilus, the 10 spheros of Atzilus, are basically the 10 projections of the way Hashem shows himself. Okay, and it corresponds with the Adam, and therefore there can now be a relationship between Hashem and the person. Right? Okay. Now, what's underneath the chariot? It's animals. Okay, even the Pnei Adam that's under the chariot is also to some degree, also on some level, also he has the element of being a human creature. Biologically, he's also somewhat of an animal, more refined animal, but an animal nonetheless. So at the period, what do you have? You're basically animals. What did Yecheskel see when he saw this vision of a chariot with animals on the bottom? Not The animals of the bottom were actually carrying the chariot. They were at the bottom and they're carrying the chariot like in a physical chariot. The wheels are what brings the chariot to where the chariot is going. The chariot isn't going anywhere if it doesn't have wheels on the bottom, right? So the wheels at the very bottom of the chariot are noisais. They are carrying and transporting the chariot, right? Which includes the throne, the kisei, the throne that's on.
Uh-oh.
Just lost something. I am.
Yeah, that's from his bandwidth.
Okay, go ahead. So here you have the chariot, you have the animals on the bottom, are like the wheels of the chariot, transporting the chariot, right? And in the process of transporting the chariot, the throne on top of the chariot gets also transported. And not only that, the Odom, which represents Hashem, right, in his projection of the 10 Tiferes, which is basically the projection of Hashem, right, is now being transported. How's he being transported? He's being transported by the wheels on the bottom underneath the chariot. Let's take this, let's apply this to something that's less metaphorical and something that we can actually appreciate and understand, okay? The way Hashem created the world, right? So we, the people in this world who are reflections of the image of Hashem, right? So us, the reflections of the image of Hashem are here now in this world, right? But in order for us to survive in this world, in order to be sustained and survive, we have to eat food, right? Including the basa, the meat. In this sense, for us to be able to progress and to move forward, right? We are dependent on the sustenance that we're getting from the food, which is on a much lower level than ourselves. When I say to project, I'm not talking about us, the animal self, I'm talking about the inner self, right? That which makes a person unique, the holy person, the person who's on a mission, right? What's his mission? His mission is coming. What animates that mission?
Uh-oh.
Gonna get slow. Bandwidth on his end.
My phone is actually running out of power. Anyway, so I'm going to cut this a little bit short. I'll get to the punchline. So in order for the neshama to fulfill its mission, right? It's a holy mission. It's a mission. Hashem, right? He cannot fulfill that mission unless he's dependent on things that are much lower than him, such as food, meat, even including meat, which is clearly on a lower level than the soul, right? He's dependent on that in order for him to be able to progress in his mission. What's that have to do with the Nevuah of Yecheskel? Because that's exactly what the metaphor of Yecheskel stands for. You have the animals at the bottom of the chariot, but they're transporting the chariot.
Who again?
Anyway, bottom line, this is the idea of eating meat. Okay, but you see, meat, it's more detailed than just eating meat. It's more detailed because one of the things that the neshama has to accomplish here in this world, right? That the wheels on the bottom of chariot are actually facilitating that he progress and that he move forward in this mission in the world, right? Is that he has to develop certain midos, certain feelings for Hashem. He has to have avas Hashem. He has to have yiras Hashem, right? He has to love and fear.
Again.
Maybe we should.
Intense experiences. Now, the meat basically, where do we have the energy to experience things in an intense way? That, says the Alter Rebbe here in the Likutei Torah, that comes from basar, from meat. So meat, he says, that's why it's sumka, it's red. Red represents gevura. Gevura is intensity. And for a person living in this world, in order for him to have the energy to be able to experience something in an intense way, right? It has to be fueled, and the fuel for intensity is eating meat. Okay, I guess if you're a vegetarian, you'll basically survive. I think to some degree you'll be able to survive. But I don't know, based on what the Alter Rebbe is saying in this week's Maimer, he may have difficulty experiencing Avas Hashem or Yiras Hashem with some degree of intensity. So that is basically the nourishment for intense experience of relationship with Hashem through love and awe and fear. Okay? So that's what we mean. That's what Yecheskel meant when he said that the faces of the animals on the bottom of the chariot, right, are transporting the chariot. Basically is the way it represents the idea that the food and the meat is actually helping us transport our feelings, progress our feelings, that we should be able to then develop into intense servants of Hashem. Okay? Now, and it's actually, what's it doing? It's transporting the Adam that's on top of the kisei. Now, this Adam, by the way, this Adam is Hashem himself, we say. It's Hashem on top of the kisei. We represent that Adam. We are his shluchim, his representatives here in this world. When we fulfill Hashem's mission in this world, which requires a degree of dependency, even on food and on meat, right? In order to have the nourishment, Hashem himself, so to speak, gets transported in this chariot, right? So the meat that we eat ultimately not only transports us in our journey to becoming more intense in our connection with Hashem, but that in turn also has the effect of, so to speak, Hashem himself progressing, so to speak. Okay.